Beginning of the End, Chapter 17, Jacob's Flight and Exile. This chapter is based on Genesis chapters 28 to 31. Threatened with death by Esau, Jacob went out from his father's home a fugitive, but with the father's blessing. Isaac had renewed the covenant promise to him, and had told him, "Look for a wife among his mother's family in Mesopotamia." Yet it was a deeply troubled heart that Jacob set out on his lonely journey. With only his staff in his hand, he must travel hundreds of miles through a country inhabited by wild, roving tribes. In his remorse and dread, he tried to avoid people, to prevent his angry brother from following him. He feared that he had lost forever the blessing God had wanted to give him, and Satan was at hand to press temptations upon him. The evening of the second day found him far away from his father's tents. He felt he was an outcast, and he knew that all his trouble had come upon him because of his own wrong actions. Despair pressed upon his soul, and he hardly dared to pray, but he was so lonely that he felt the need of protection from God as never before. With weeping he confessed his sin, and asked earnestly for some evidence that he was not utterly forsaken. He had lost all confidence in himself, and he feared that God had rejected him. But God's mercy was still extended to his erring, distrustful servant. The Lord compassionately revealed just what Jacob needed, a Savior. He had sinned, but God revealed a way for him to be restored to divine favor. Tired, the wanderer lay down on the ground with a stone for his pillow. As he slept, he saw a ladder whose base rested on the earth while the top reached to heaven. Angels were ascending and descending on this ladder. Above it was the Lord of glory, and from the heavens his voice was heard. "I am the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. In you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed." This promise had been given to Abraham and to Isaac, and now it was renewed to Jacob. Then words of comfort and encouragement were spoken. "Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you." The Lord in mercy opened up the future before the repentant fugitive so he might be prepared to resist the temptations that would come to him when alone among idolaters and schemers. The knowledge that the purpose of God was reaching its accomplishment through him would constantly prompt him to faithfulness. In this vision, Jacob saw the parts of the plan of redemption that were essential to him at that time. The mystic ladder revealed in his dream was the same to which Christ referred in his conversation with Nathanael. "You shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." John chapter 1, verse 51. The sin of Adam and Eve separated earth from heaven, so that human beings could not have communion with their Maker. Yet the world was not left in hopelessness. The ladder represents Jesus, the appointed way of communication. Christ connects us in our weakness and helplessness with the source of infinite power. All this was revealed to Jacob in his dream. Although his mind at once grasped a part of the revelation, its great and mysterious truths were the study of his lifetime, unfolding to his understanding more and more. Jacob awoke in the deep stillness of night. The vision had disappeared. Only the dim outline of lonely hills and the heavens, bright with stars, now met his gaze. But he had a solemn sense that God was with him. "Surely the Lord is in this place," he said, "and I did not know it. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone he had put at his head and set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, or the house of God. Then he made the solemn vow, "If God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that you gave me I will surely give a tenth to you." Jacob was not trying to bargain with God. The Lord had already promised him prosperity, and this vow came from a heart filled with gratitude for the assurance of God's mercy. Jacob felt that the special evidences of divine favor demanded a return. Christians should often remember with gratitude the precious deliverances that God has given to them, opening ways for them when all seemed dark and threatening, refreshing them when they were ready to faint, In view of countless blessings, each one should often ask, "What shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits toward me?" Psalm 116, verse 12. Why the tithe is sacred. Whenever we experience a special deliverance or new and unexpected favors are granted us, we should acknowledge God's goodness by gifts or offerings to his cause. As we are continually receiving the blessings of God, so we are to be continually giving. "Of all that you give me," said Jacob, "I will surely give a tenth to you." Shall we who enjoy the full light of the gospel be content to give less to God than was given by those who lived before Jesus came? Aren't our obligations even greater? But how useless to measure time, money, and love mathematically against a love so immeasurable and a gift of such incredible worth. Tithes for Christ! Oh, meager pittance, shameful response to that which costs so much. From the cross of Calvary, Christ calls for total consecration of all that we have, all that we are. With new faith and assured of the presence of heavenly angels, Jacob continued his journey to the land of the people of the East. But how different was his arrival from that of Abraham's messenger nearly 100 years before. Eliezer, the servant, had come with attendants riding on camels, with rich gifts of gold and silver. The son was a lonely, footsore traveler with no possessions except his staff. Like Abraham's servant, Jacob stopped beside a well, and it was here that he met Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. On making known his family relationship, he was welcomed to the home of Laban. A few weeks showed the worth of his diligence and skill, and he was urged to stay. It was arranged that he would give Laban 7 years' service to be able to marry Rachel. Jacob's love for Rachel. In early times, custom required the bridegroom before the marriage engagement to pay a sum of money or its equivalent in other property, according to his financial circumstances, to the father of his wife. This was regarded as a security for the marriage. Fathers did not think it safe to trust the happiness of their daughters to men who had not made provision for the support of a family. If they did not have sufficient thrift and energy to manage business and acquire cattle or lands, it was feared that their life would prove worthless. But provision was made to test those who had nothing to pay for a wife. They were permitted to work for the father whose daughter they loved. The length of time was regulated by the value of the dowry required. When the man was faithful and proved worthy, he obtained the daughter as his wife. Generally, the dowry that the father received was given to the daughter at her marriage. In the case of both Rachel and Leah, however, Laban selfishly kept the dowry that should have been given them. They referred to this when they said, just before they left Mesopotamia, "He has sold us, and also completely consumed our money." Requiring the suitor to render service to secure his bride prevented a hasty marriage. There was opportunity to test the depth of his affections, as well as his ability to provide for a family. In our time, it is often the case that persons have little opportunity before marriage to become acquainted with each other's habits and disposition. They are practically strangers when they unite their lives at the altar. Many find too late that they are not adapted to each other, and lifelong misery is the result. Often the wife and children suffer from the laziness or vices of the husband and father. If the character of the suitor had been tested before marriage, according to the ancient custom, great unhappiness might have been prevented. Jacob gave 7 years of faithful service for Rachel, and the years that he served seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. But selfish Laban practiced a cruel deception in substituting Leah for Rachel. The fact that Leah herself cooperated in the cheat caused Jacob to feel that he could not love her. Angrily he rebuked Laban, who then offered Rachel for another 7 years' service. But Laban insisted that Leah should not be discarded. This placed Jacob in a most painful and trying position, but he finally agreed. He would keep Leah and marry Rachel. Rachel was always the one he loved best, but his life was made bitter by the rivalry between the sister wives. For 20 years Jacob stayed in Mesopotamia working for Laban, who was determined to keep for himself all the benefits of their connection. He demanded 14 years of toil for his 2 daughters, and during the remaining period, Jacob's wages were changed 10 times. Yet Jacob's service was diligent and faithful. During some parts of the year it was necessary for him to be constantly with the flocks in the fields, to guard them in the dry season against perishing from thirst, and during the coldest months from becoming chilled with heavy night frosts. Jacob was the chief shepherd. The servants in his employ were the under-shepherds. If any of the sheep were missing, the chief shepherd suffered the loss, and he called the servants to a strict account if the flock was not flourishing. We have a faithful shepherd. The shepherd's life of caretaking and compassion for the helpless creatures illustrates some precious truths of the gospel. Christ is compared to a shepherd, and he saw his sheep doomed to die in the dark ways of sin. To save these wandering ones, he left the honors and glories of his Father's house. He says, "I will seek what was lost and bring back what was driven away, bind up the broken and strengthen what was sick. I will save my flock, and they shall no longer be a prey, nor shall the beasts of the land devour them." Ezekiel chapter 34, verses 16, 22, and 28. His voice is heard calling them to his fold, a shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from storm and rain. Isaiah chapter 4, verse 6. He strengthens the weak, relieves the suffering, gathers the lambs in his arms, and carries them next to his heart. His sheep love him. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. See John 10, verses 1 to 15. The Church of Christ has been purchased with his blood, and every shepherd who has the Spirit of Christ will imitate his self-denying example, constantly working for the good of his charge, and the flock will prosper under his care. When the chief shepherd appears, says the apostle, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 4. Jacob, growing weary of working for Laban, proposed to return to Canaan. He said to his father-in-law, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." But Laban urged him to stay, declaring, "I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Said Jacob, "What you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount." But as time passed, Laban became envious of the greater prosperity of Jacob, who became exceedingly prosperous. Laban's sons shared their father's jealousy, and their malicious speeches came to Laban's ears. "He has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all his wealth." And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable toward him as before. Jacob would have left his scheming relative long before except for the fear of meeting up with Esau. Now he felt that he was in danger from the sons of Laban, who, looking on his wealth as their own, might try to get it by violence. He was in great perplexity and distress, but he remembered the gracious promise at Bethel, and he carried his case to God. In a dream his prayer was answered. "Return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you." The flocks and herds were speedily gathered and sent forward, and with his wives, children, and servants, Jacob crossed the Euphrates River, hurrying on toward Gilead on the borders of Canaan. After 3 days Laban set out in pursuit, overtaking the company on the 7th day of their journey. He was hot with anger, and determined to force them to return. The fugitives were indeed in great danger. God himself intervened to protect his servant. "It is in my power to do you harm," said Laban, "but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad,' that is, he should not force him to return or urge him by flattering promises." Laban had withheld the marriage dowry of his daughters and treated Jacob with cunning and harshness, but he now reproved him for his secret departure, which had given the father no opportunity to make a feast or even say goodbye to his daughters and their children. In reply, Jacob plainly set forth Laban's selfish and grasping conduct, and appealed to him as a witness to his own faithfulness and honesty. "Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had been with me," said Jacob, "surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." Laban could not deny the facts, and now proposed a covenant of peace. Jacob consented, and a pile of stones was erected to represent the agreement. Laban named this pillar Mizpah, which means watchtower, saying, May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. To confirm the treaty, the parties held a feast. The night was spent in friendly fellowship, and at dawn Laban and his company departed. With this separation, all connection between the children of Abraham and the dwellers in Mesopotamia ended.